So the bottom of this scale is 20. It's the very lowest thought that you can have. And it will always weaken you. Not only will it weaken you, but it will ultimately destroy you, such as its weakness. It's at 20, it's shame. So if you are using shame on yourself, or you're using shame as a way of parenting or working with others, what you are doing is you are always using an emotional energy that will weaken. The emotion that accompanies shame is called humiliation. And the life view is one of misery, and the God view, the view of God, is one of despising. God despises us. We are ashamed. There's something wrong with us. The next level up, which is very, very low and will always weaken you, is 30, is guilt. Feeling guilty. The emotion that accompanies it is blame. The God view is one of God as vindictive. God is punishing. And the life view is one of life is evil. There's something wrong with life. The next level up is one that's called 50. And this level is the emotion that accompanies that is despair. So that apathy and despair go together. The God view is one of God as condemning. And the life view is that life is hopeless. There's not much that we can do. The next level up is 75, which still weakens us. It's grief. The emotion is regret. God's view is disdainful. And the life view is one of tragic. Life is tragic. We are now moving to 100, which is called fear. And the emotion that accompanies fear is anxiety. The God view is one of punitive. God is punishing. And life view, frightening. Life is frightening. Now we move up to 125, what he calls desire. And the emotion that accompanies that is craving. Always wanting to get someplace else. The life view is one of life is disappointing. And the God view is denial, denying. Now we move to 150. We are still at emotions and thoughts that you have that will weaken you. At 150, the emotion that accompanies it is hate. The life view is that life is antagonistic. And the God view is that God is vengeful. We are now moving closer to that which will strengthen us, to something called pride. Pride. And the emotion that accompanies pride is called scorn. The life view is that life is very demanding. And the God view is that God is indifferent. Doesn't care one way or the other. Now we move to 200. We are now making a distinction between being able to recognize truth from falsehood. This is called courage. And the emotion that accompanies courage is affirmation, affirming, life is affirming. The life view is that it is feasible. And the God view is that God is permitting. God allows us. All right. Now we move to 250. We are now talking about emotions and thoughts which strengthen us. At 250, trust is the emotion. Neutrality is the level of thought. The life view is life is satisfactory, and that the view of God is that God is enabling. God enables us. We move now to 310, what he calls willingness. Willingness. Whereas the emotion of willingness is something called optimism, an optimistic view of life. The life view is that life is hopeful. And the God view is that God is inspiring. Now we have moved from God being despising and vindictive and punitive and vengeful and indifferent and permitting and enabling to now God is inspiring. At 350, acceptance, the emotion is forgiveness. I accept and I forgive. The life view is that life is harmonious, and the God view is that God is merciful. mercy. We now move to 400, where very, very few people ever get to, called reason. The emotion of reason is understanding. The life view is that life is meaningful. There's a meaning to all of this. And the God view is that God is not only merciful and inspiring, but God is wise. Wisdom comes with knowing God. Now we move to 500, which we're talking about a handful of people. The level is called love. The emotion is reverence. The life view is that life is benign, non-cancerous, non-debilitating. And the God view is that God is loving. At 540, the level of joy, where there is sadness, let me bring joy, remember. The emotion is serenity, a sense of just being serene in life. The life view is that life is complete. I am complete. And the God view is that all is one. All is one. At 600, the level of peace, the emotion is bliss. So it's not just serenity, but it's bliss, which is that wonderful, great, good feeling, continuous. Life view, life is not only complete, it is perfect. And the God view, all being. And finally, enlightenment, between 700 and 1,000. The emotion that goes with the sense of enlightenment is what he calls the ineffable. Ineffable. Life view, everything is. There's no judgment. And the God view, self. The self is God. But remember the word coincidence. In mathematics, it's a term that defines angles that coincide. And in mathematics, two angles that coincide are said to be angles that fit together perfectly. And we have taken a term that means something that fits together perfectly and interpret it to mean that is something that fits together and shows up accidentally or in chaos. But actually, anything that is coincidental with something else is a fit that is perfect. And there are no accidents in this universe. When you begin to access a power, you start to have an awareness that it's absurd to believe that in a universe which has an intelligence behind it, that an accident could show up. Everything is a part of the perfection of it. Everything. There are no accidents in this universe. You came in when you were supposed to, you'll leave when you're supposed to. The children that came through you or didn't come through you are all part of that perfection. Questioning it, challenging it, all it does is keep you from accessing the ability to manifest and attract into your life what you really would like to have when you begin to question it. And when you ask, now the question always comes up when I talk about these kinds of things is, well, if there is a force, and this force is a part of the perfection and there are no accidents, at what point do I have a free will? And am I making any of these decisions? And Jung answered that question brilliantly. He said, at the same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, you are also the spear carrier or the extra in a much larger drama. You are doomed to make choices. And that paradox is something you have to live with. Yes, you are making choices. Yes, you have the capacity to attract into your life virtually anything you want. And yes, there is an intelligence into which you can connect that can access virtually anything you put your attention on. And yes, it's all part of the perfection of the universe. Yes, both of those things you have to live with at the same time. You have to transcend those dichotomies. But I want to speak just for a few moments about what happens when you leave ordinary levels of awareness and you leave these lower energies. When you leave the energy of the solid, where all of your problems occur, when you leave that and move into this energy of spirit, wherein you only have love to give away, as I spoke about earlier, where your response to sadness is always a higher energy of joy, where your response to doubt is always a higher energy of faith, where your response to hatred is always the higher energy of love. When you practice what Francesco taught us in that very famous prayer attributed to St. Francis. What happens when you reach these higher spiritual energies is that you start to access something in which you can see it coming. And you get outside of yourself, as I just spoke about. And that is called intuition. And that intuition is available to you, that you can practice it virtually any time in your life, but you've got to get out of these lower and slower energies because it's not accessible there. It doesn't exist there. Problems exist there. Fear exists there. Worry exists there. Guilt exists there. Hatred exists there. Anger exists there. These are all lower and slower energies. And when you listen to the 10th principle, you'll see that they're not just lower energies, but they weaken us whenever we access them and whenever we use them. But when we get outside of them, we start to get out in front. And now I suggest to you, brazenly, that you don't have to have accidents in your life. That you don't have to be a victim of crime in your life. That you don't have to live in a world of scarcity in your life. You don't have to. If you're willing to take responsibility for whatever acts of crime have come your way without guilt, if you're willing to and just say, I own them, they're mine, I've attracted it for some reason. If you're willing to say, I have had these various accidents and I've attracted that into my life, I don't understand why, but I know that it's mine. If you're willing to say that I've attracted the wrong people into my life, people who have abused me and victimized me, and I have taught people how I'm willing to be treated, and I'm no longer willing to do that, and so I'm going to send out a different attractor energy. If you're willing just to take responsibility without guilt, I underline it, I don't want any letters, okay? I underline it. You do not deserve any of it. You are not being punished for the things that have happened in your life. You just own them. They're yours. Because you can't get past them if you're waiting for something outside of you to change. You get past them by taking responsibility for them. Then what happens is you start seeing an accident coming. And many of you have had that experience. When you are in a higher frequency in your life, and you have an intuitive sense that, I know it's a green light, but I think I better stop. You know, a lot of heads nodding up and down. And something tells you, whatever it might be, something tells you, I better stop and slow down here. And zoom, there goes somebody through a red light, and you stop and you have that feeling that goes through you, go, what was that? What was that? And you know when you can access that? When you're close to God. When you're in fear, you can't access it. One man who came here from India in the early part of this century, his name was Vivekananda. He came here to, he was sent here really, and showed up in Boston, I think 1910, and wrote some beautiful things. He's really one of India's great saints. And he had these to say, I used this at the beginning of the third part of Your Sacred Self. He said, the blossom vanishes of itself as the fruit grows. So will your lower self vanish as the divine grows within you. Just like a blossom vanishes as the fruit emerges, so will the lower self vanish as the divine grows within you. And the divine is not some religious message, some orthodox thing that you have to memorize. The divine is that thing that Pierre Teilhard called the glue that holds the entire universe together, something called love. And that's what it's really all about. And this love is really the very thing that holds your life together. Did you ever think about the moment that you die and head back to nowhere, that your body begins to disintegrate? This thing turns into dust, and the instant that life leaves it, it starts to... So what is it that was holding it together and keeping it from doing that? There is something holding you together and keeping it from just like turning into dust. And that thing that holds it together and allows you to be whole is this force that is invisible and in another dimension. And it's getting to know this force that is at the uppermost in my consciousness. And when you understand that when you come to trust in yourself, or trust in this inner divine part of yourself that is not physical, when you trust in the noticer rather than that which you notice, that you're really, when you come to trust in yourself, you're really trusting in the very wisdom that created you. You become one with the universal wisdom that is your creator, that brought you from the picnic to the room and leaving the room. See, what we have to learn to do is abandon the paradigm that other people or other things or other circumstances are responsible for our life, and instead know that we chose it. And we must learn to develop an inner candle flame that never flickers, though the worst goes before us. And that inner candle flame tells us in our logical mind that if I have a problem inside, then the solution has to be where the problem is. So I will stop looking out here for the solutions to anything that's going on in my life that isn't working, and begin to ask myself, how am I processing my world? And some of the things that we've been handed are that other people are responsible for our lives, that your talent is handed to you and it's dispersed in certain amounts, and there's certain things that you can do and certain things that you cannot do. We've been taught that more is better and that we should chase after things while our higher self is always saying just be peaceful. We've been taught that the petty tyrants who show up in our lives are people that we should ignore and we should hate. I want to tell you something. The most influential person in my life was the most tyrannical. The man who abandoned me when I was just a few months old, who put my mother in a hospital on several occasions with his beatings, who spent 5 years in prison for stealing from the blind, selling their things and keeping the money, who walked away from a family of 3 boys during a depression, and never paid a cent in child support and stole from everyone he came around, who required me to go into an orphanage for the first 10 years of my life and never showed up once to even say hello or I'm your father, who then visited that same abuse on 5 additional women and died in New Orleans in 1964 of cirrhosis of the liver as a pauper, and had his body shipped to Biloxi, Mississippi, was my father. This petty tyrant who showed up in my life was someone that I had grown up and been taught to hate. But when I found myself at his grave in 1974, just a few months before I wrote Erroneous Zones, I had a transformational epiphany, a natohi, a great awakening, a great seeing, when I was able to forgive my father. And in the process of forgiving my father, I was introduced to enlightenment and was able to get my life on purpose once and for all. The end result was that my life absolutely turned around, and we are here tonight sharing in whatever I have to share with you because of that experience. And this petty tyrant, who so many of us think shouldn't have showed up in our life, the abuse that we had, the abandonment that we experienced, the relationships, the people who screwed us badly, the people who owe us money, who stole from us and all of that, we don't understand that it's all in order.
The purpose of dancing at a dance floor is not to get to someplace else on the dance floor. Your purpose isn't to end up over here, like this is where we're going to end up. So all of this other stuff is irrelevant. Our purpose is to get here. We don't do that. When we dance, we enjoy every single step of the dance, all of the music. And wherever we end up is where we end up. It's just like enjoying a concert. I mean, the purpose of enjoying the concert isn't to get to the end. If that was the case, then the people who conducted the fastest would be the best. And people who wrote only finales would be considered geniuses. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, that was fantastic. You see? It's like peeling a banana. You know, the purpose isn't to get to the other end. It's to enjoy every bite. And the same with life. If we, self-actualizing, fully functioning, highly spiritual people, the great teachers are people who didn't do what they did because they were going to make money off of it, because they were going to be approved of, because it was going to be enduring. They did it because it was what their heart told them they had to do. They have no investment in power or control over others. Their life is not about who I'm better than. See, true nobility is not about being better than somebody else. Everybody's better than somebody else at something and not as good as somebody else at something else. True nobility is about being better than you used to be. It's about growing in your life. That's what nobility is. And highly functioning people they're not looking into other people's lives. The last line of Candide, Voltaire's great novel, this whole story of this wanderer, Candide, this great teacher and sort of comic person. The last line, I guess we'll have to learn to cultivate our own garden. Cultivate your own garden. If other people want to grow rutabagas and you want to grow cabbage, then allow that and be independent of that. But so many people live their lives through what others are doing, how well they're doing it. Fully functioning people let go of that. That they have incredibly high energy and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, entheos, the God within. When people say to me, what makes a great speaker? I said, be authentic and be enthusiastic. And it doesn't matter what your content is. People will love you if you're authentic and enthusiastic, if they can see the God within you. If they have no concept of failure. There's no such thing. If you take a golf ball and you put it up on a tee and you stand there and you swing at the golf ball and it dribbles off to the side, you haven't failed. You've produced a result. The question is, what do you do with the results you produce? Everything that you do produces a result. You can call it failure and say, well, I'm not good at this, I've never been very athletic, and apply all kinds of labels to yourself. But we should never, ever allow ourselves to think of ourselves as failures, nor should we ever place that label on anybody else, because you can't fail. It's just a judgment. The only difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. It's just a judgment. And the difference between success and failure is just a judgment. You know, Edison, the great inventor, of course. You know, when asked the question, he had tried 25,000 different ways to invent a battery, and he still didn't have it. And finally, someone said to him, how does it feel, someone of your stature, to have failed 25,000 times? He said, failed? I don't know anything about failing. He said, today I know 25,000 ways not to make a battery. What do you know? And every time you do something, every time you go, and it doesn't work, you learn something. And the question isn't whether you failed, it's what do I do with the results I produce? If you pick the golf tee ball up and put it back on there and say, all right, I'm going to correct that, and you do it again and again and again, eventually, if you go through the 4 pathways, if you practice the discipline and the wisdom and the unconditional love, eventually, when you surrender, you'll know how to hit a golf ball. But you'll never do it the moment you label yourself to be a failure.
Another new way of being for me is to think of yourself in terms of personal authority rather than being an authoritarian. Personal authority. A person who has authority never needs to dominate anyone else, ever. Dominating doesn't become necessary. In business, you can have authority. The people who have the most authority are the ones who listen the most, and the ones who are the most conscientious about what do other people have to say. A person in a relationship who has to dominate somebody else and has to make the other person submissive shows that they don't have authority, because they're getting their power not from within for themselves, but on the basis of who they can control. And that never lasts. That never lasts. The only thing that lasts is having inner power, if you will. Know thyself. That's what Shakespeare said. Know thyself. The more you know yourself, the more you become honest with yourself, honesty becomes just a way of life. No, I don't think the world necessarily does, but you can't run your world. You can't run your world based upon what the rest of the people in the world want or don't want. To me, honesty is like, it's a karma that goes out into the world. How people treat you in the world is their karma. How you react is yours. And when you react to it with dishonesty, that's what you're putting out into the world, dishonesty. And when you put dishonesty out into the world, that's what's going to come back to you, because what goes out is what comes back. That all, as you sow, so shall you reap. I mean, it's in every great institution that there is in the world, whether it's a religion or a philosophy or whatever. What you put out is what comes back. Whatever you plant is what you're going to get back. And the more that you put out honesty, just because it's what you are, because you are being honesty, you're not trying to be honest, you're just being honesty, then that's what will come back to you on a regular basis. And when it doesn't, you'll just see that as another test for you to pass. For me, it has become a way of life. It's called serenity instead of acquisitions. The more you try to acquire, the more you try to get, the more you try to collect in your life and evaluate yourself on the basis of that, the less serenity you're going to have. More is less. It's almost a secret of the universe. Serenity means inner peace. It means that you can find joy in every moment that you have in your life instead of always looking for it. It means that while you are driving along the countryside, and seeing, instead of saying, oh, I'm on my way to this point, that you can open your eyes and see it with new eyes. See the rolling mountains, see the grass, see the deer, see the sky. You can just stop wherever you are in this second, wherever you are, and just look around you, and you can begin to appreciate just your surroundings and your environment. Then you can begin to appreciate the people that are in your life, and even the ones that are negative and you're having the most difficulty with. You can practice a new way of being with them, which is sending them love, sending them flowers, send them books, send them a tape, send them something, and just see what kind of reaction that you get. Super emotional health is just an attitude. An attitude is everything. And it's being personally an authority on yourself rather than authoritarian and trying to be dominating someone else or to be dominated. And serenity, which is the name of my little girl, my youngest daughter, Serena, rather than acquisitions and accumulations and trying to prove yourself that way. And when you get that serenity, which comes from the way that you think always, then you will replace all of the other junk that keeps you back here between 6 and 1 on that clock. And once you get past it, you'll never, ever be able to go back. Because the light, living in the light, is a way of being that if you're not there, you don't get it yet, but once you see it, and once it begins to take over your life, you can never go back. That is your purpose. Your purpose isn't to try to be loving. Your purpose is to be love.